The river didn't look dangerous after the hurricane passed. That was the problem. 3 days earlier, the storm had ripped through the North Carolina coast, with walls of rain and wind that bent trees nearly horizontal. Storm surge pushed saltwater miles inland, flooding marshes and estuaries, redrawing invisible boundaries between ocean and river. But by the time the skies cleared, the surface of the Cape Fear tributary looked almost calm. Brown, swollen, carrying debris slowly downstream like nothing had changed. 6 kayakers unloaded their gear at a half-flooded launch ramp just after sunrise. They were experienced paddlers, local, familiar with the river's turns and shallow flats. The plan was simple. Ride the post-storm current upriver for a few miles, document the flooding damage, then drift back with the flow. Water levels were higher than usual, current stronger, visibility nearly zero beneath the surface. But hurricanes always left the river messy. That didn't make it lethal, at least not visibly. Jamie, the unofficial leader of the group, checked her GPS and tide chart before pushing off. The river still smelled faintly brackish, salt mixing with mud and uprooted vegetation. She noticed the scent, but didn't dwell on it. Storm surge always carried ocean inland temporarily. It would recede. It always did. The group spread out naturally as they paddled, bright kayaks cutting thin wakes through opaque brown water. Sunlight reflected hard off the surface, blinding at certain angles. Beneath them, nothing could be seen. Not logs, not sandbars, not depth changes. Just thick, sediment-heavy current moving with more force than usual. About a mile upriver, they passed a stretch where the bank had partially collapsed, roots exposed like broken ribs. One of the paddlers, Chris, joked about sharks making it this far inland after storms. Bull sharks had been documented in rivers before. It was a fact tossed around like trivia. Interesting. Unlikely. The group laughed it off. The ocean was miles away. Saltwater intrusion never lasted long enough to matter. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It was a sudden heavy bump beneath Mark's kayak that lifted the stern slightly before dropping it back down. He turned immediately, expecting a submerged branch. Nothing surfaced. The water behind him smoothed out too quickly. Probably debris, someone called out. Post-storm rivers are full of debris. But debris doesn't change direction mid-current. They continued paddling, though the spacing between them tightened unconsciously. A few minutes later, Jamie noticed something else. Bait fish breaking the surface in frantic bursts near the opposite bank. Not scattered movement, coordinated panic. The water there churned briefly before going flat again. She slowed her stroke, scanning. The river was too wide to see clearly from one bank to the other, through glare. Then the current shifted oddly around them, not slowing, but redirecting, in subtle V-shaped lines that didn't match the natural flow. Mark felt it next. A sharp jolt to the underside of his kayak, harder than the first. The impact rocked him sideways, paddle slipping from his hand. He barely kept balance. "That's not debris," he said, voice tight now. The river surface 10 yards away bulged upward in a low, muscular roll. Not a splash, not a thrash, just displacement. The color beneath shifted darker for half a second before vanishing again. Jamie's stomach dropped. Bull sharks tolerate fresh water. They navigate brackish systems with ease. After hurricanes, they follow surge inland, chasing bait and disoriented prey. The thought moved through her too late. "Group up," she said, louder than intended. The kayaks pulled closer instinctively, forming a loose cluster mid-channel. That's when the first dorsal fin broke the surface. It wasn't tall like in movies. It was thick and triangular, cutting low through the brown water, less than 15 feet from them. It moved parallel for a few seconds, then dipped under without splash. Silence followed, heavy and charged. Chris swore under his breath. No one laughed this time. They were nearly 2 miles from the nearest stable shoreline, and the flooded banks on either side were lined with submerged brush and unstable mud. Landing wasn't simple. Another fin surfaced behind them, then another farther out near mid-current, not circling wildly, tracking. The water between their kayaks felt suddenly thin, like the barrier between air and depth had narrowed. Jamie tried to keep her breathing steady. "Slow strokes. Stay tight," she ordered. But bull sharks don't announce attack with spectacle. They test first. The strike came without warning. A violent upward slam beneath Chris's kayak flipped him instantly, hull snapping sideways as something massive hit from below. He disappeared into brown water before anyone could shout. The surface exploded seconds later, red blooming outward in heavy clouds that didn't disperse quickly in the slow current. His scream cut off abruptly. One of the kayaks rammed into another as panic fractured their formation. The river, calm moments earlier, now carried a spreading stain that pulsed with movement beneath it. Jamie saw a thick gray body roll once just below the surface, jaws opening briefly before vanishing again. There was no land within immediate reach that wasn't flooded or tangled in debris. The current pulled at them steadily downstream, dragging them away from the last stable dock they had passed. Above them, the sky remained clear, blue, indifferent, and beneath their kayaks, something that had ridden the hurricane inland had found new water to hunt in. The river swallowed Chris so fast it felt unreal, like a trick of muddy light. The red clouds spread outward in slow ribbons, heavier than in ocean water, clinging to the surface instead of dispersing. Jamie forced herself not to stare at it. Bull sharks are drawn to vibration first, then scent. Panic meant splashing. Splashing meant signals. "Back in your boats!" she shouted, though everyone was already upright except the empty kayak drifting sideways where Chris had been. One of the paddlers, Lena, started sobbing, paddle striking the water in frantic bursts that slapped loud against the surface. "Stop splashing!" Mark barked, voice cracking. The current tugged at them harder now, carrying the blood downstream like a banner. 10 yards away, a dorsal fin surfaced again, thicker this time, closer. It cut through the red-stained water and vanished beneath Mark's kayak. He lifted his feet instinctively, pressing them flat against the interior hull. The river was wide, but the flooded banks on both sides had transformed into submerged forests of branches and unstable mud. Landing meant stepping into water they couldn't see through. The sharks didn't need clear water. They hunted in turbidity. They relied on pressure changes, low-frequency vibrations, sudden movements. Jamie's mind raced through fragments of things she'd once read. Bull sharks are territorial in rivers. They don't always feed and leave like ocean predators. They test repeatedly. A second impact struck Lena's kayak from below, hard enough to lift it partially out of the water before slamming it back down. She screamed, nearly capsizing. Mark grabbed her bow to stabilize it, but the contact between boats created erratic movement. Beneath them, the river churned with deliberate force. A gray body flashed just under the surface, thick and muscular, easily 8 feet long, not alone. Another shape moved parallel farther out, keeping distance but matching speed. They weren't in open ocean where escape meant depth. They were trapped mid-channel, miles from the launch ramp, current pushing them deeper into flooded terrain. "We move for that dock," Jamie said suddenly, pointing upstream where a partially submerged fishing platform jutted out near a bend. It was unstable and half-collapsed, but it stood above water. It was something solid. Paddling upstream against post-hurricane current felt like trying to climb a conveyor belt, moving the opposite direction. Every stroke cost energy. Every pause let them drift farther from safety. Another violent strike hit from beneath, this time slamming directly into Jamie's hull. The kayak jolted upward so sharply she felt her teeth snap together. She heard the unmistakable sound of teeth scraping fiberglass. Not a full bite. A test. The river around them bulged again. Then came the second kill attempt. The empty kayak where Chris had been suddenly jerked sideways with such force it flipped end over end. Something massive breached partially, jaws clamping down on the plastic, thrashing once before releasing. The boat split along the seam, halves separating and drifting apart uselessly. The display wasn't feeding, it was dominance, showing power. Lena started hyperventilating. Mark reached across and grabbed her life vest strap to keep her steady. "Eyes on the dock," he said, though his own breathing had lost rhythm. They paddled harder, muscles burning as the current fought every stroke. The dock drew closer, inch by inch, its wooden planks tilted and weathered but intact enough to hold weight. Behind them, the river surface smoothed for a moment. That was worse. Silence in predator water means repositioning. Jamie risked a glance downward and saw it clearly for the first time. A thick gray form tracking just below her left side, eye barely visible through sediment cloud. The shark accelerated suddenly, not upward, but forward, surging past her kayak in a blur and cutting directly toward the dock ahead of them. It wasn't retreating. It was intercepting. The platform shuddered slightly as something struck one of its submerged support posts. The wood vibrated audibly. The message was clear. Even elevated refuge was contested. "Faster!" Jamie shouted, voice raw. Mark reached the dock first and lunged upward, grabbing a splintered plank with one hand, while steadying Lena's kayak with the other. As he pulled himself halfway out of the water, the river exploded behind him. A shark breached almost fully this time, jaws snapping shut inches from the stern of his kayak. The impact knocked Lena sideways. She lost her grip and fell into the river with a single sharp scream. The water around her detonated red instantly. Mark dove forward onto the dock just as her body vanished beneath the surface in a violent roll. The sound that followed wasn't cinematic. It was heavy and final. Jamie rammed her kayak against the dock and clawed her way up, nails splitting against wet wood. She turned just in time to see a dorsal fin slice through the spreading stain where Lena had been. Another fin followed farther out, circling wide. They weren't leaving. They were claiming. The dock trembled again as something large brushed against its submerged beams. The current continued pulling debris past them, carrying blood and broken kayak fragments downstream. They were above water now, but not safe, because bull sharks in flooded rivers don't always hunt alone. And the hurricane had given them miles of new territory to explore. The dock listed slightly to the left, its support posts groaning each time something heavy brushed against them from below. Jamie lay flat on the warped planks, chest heaving, river water pouring off her clothes in steady streams. Mark crawled farther inland across the platform until his back hit the rusted remains of an old bench bolted to the boards. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The river moved as if nothing violent had happened, carrying broken kayak fragments and streaks of diluted red past the bend. But beneath the surface, pressure built again. A thick gray shadow passed between the support posts, slow and deliberate, not feeding, patrolling. Jamie forced herself upright and scanned the shoreline. The nearest stable bank was still at least 20 yards away, but the mud there was unstable and tangled with debris. Jumping would mean landing waist-deep in opaque water before reaching solid ground. The current would drag them sideways instantly. The dock might collapse under sustained impact. Neither option felt survivable. Mark wiped river water from his eyes and looked down through the narrow gaps between planks. "They're still here," he muttered. The word they felt wrong and necessary at the same time. Bull sharks are solitary when feeding in open water. In confined river systems after storms, behavior shifts, territory overlaps, competition intensifies. The hurricane had turned the river into a corridor, thick with displaced bait fish and animal carcasses washed inland. Predators follow opportunity. A sudden jolt from below shook the platform violently enough to throw Jamie off balance. She grabbed a splintered railing just as one of the support posts cracked audibly under torque. The shark didn't breach this time. It rammed upward from depth, testing structural weakness the way it had tested kayaks. Mark spotted a long metal boat hook lying near the bench, likely left behind by a previous fisherman. He grabbed it and crouched near the edge, heart hammering. Another dark form surfaced briefly 5 yards out, dorsal fin slicing low before submerging again. They weren't frantic. They were patient. Jamie's phone, miraculously still functioning inside a waterproof pouch, showed 1 bar of signal flickering in and out. She dialed emergency services with trembling fingers. The call connected for 3 seconds before dropping. She tried again. This time she managed to shout coordinates and the word sharks before the line died. It might have been enough. Or it might not. The dock shuddered again as something massive scraped along its underside. One post shifted visibly now, leaning at a slight angle. If it gave way completely, the entire outer section of the platform would tilt into the river. Mark positioned himself near the weakest beam, boat hook extended downward through the gap. "If it comes up, I push for the eye," he said, voice thin but focused. Jamie scanned the water for movement patterns. Then she saw it. The largest shark yet. Easily 9 feet, body thicker than the others. It didn't circle widely like the rest. It moved straight beneath the dock, brushing each post with its flank. Mapping structure. It paused directly under the cracked support beam. The water bulged upward slowly. Jamie felt the shift in air pressure before the impact. The shark surged from below with full force, slamming into the compromised post. The wood splintered instantly. The outer corner of the dock dropped several inches, one side dipping into the river. Mark nearly slid off as the platform tilted sharply. The shark breached partially during the strike, jaws snapping at the falling edge of the wood. Its teeth clamped briefly onto the broken beam, shredding fibers before releasing. Mark drove the metal hook downward blindly, striking scale with a jarring clang. The shark twisted violently, tail whipping against the remaining supports. Another fin surfaced nearby, then another farther out. They were converging. The tilted section of dock groaned under strain, nails pulling free with sharp pops. Jamie grabbed Mark's jacket and dragged him back toward the remaining stable planks, just as the outer corner gave way entirely. The broken section crashed into the river in a spray of brown water. For a split second, the sharks thrashed around the debris, biting at splintered wood as if asserting control over fallen territory. The remaining half of the dock trembled, but held. Jamie and Mark pressed themselves against the inner beams, away from the edge now exposed directly above open water. The river around them churned heavily, red streaks from earlier attacks mixing with new debris. The largest shark surfaced fully this time, circling tight near the broken platform. Its dorsal fin cut a deliberate arc no more than 6 feet from where their legs hung moments earlier. It wasn't leaving. It was conditioning the space, claiming vertical reach. In the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of an outboard engine fighting current. Rescue might be coming, or it might be another boat entering contested water without understanding what the hurricane had pushed inland. The sharks continued circling, tight and methodical. The current carried splintered boards downstream, along with the last visible traces of red. Above them, the sky remained clear and bright, offering no hint of what churned below. And on the half-destroyed dock, in the middle of a swollen river, survival now depended not on swimming faster, but on holding above water longer than the predators were willing to wait. The engine sound grew louder against the current, uneven at first, then steadier as it rounded the bend upstream. Jamie didn't wave immediately. She didn't scream. Sudden movement had already cost them 2 lives. Mark lifted one arm slowly, controlled, signaling without splashing. The rescue skiff appeared through glare and drifting debris, piloted by a local deputy and a wildlife officer who had responded to the broken emergency call. They saw the damaged dock first, then the churn in the water around it. The officer cut the engine before entering the tight circle where the largest fin continued slicing slow arcs. In shallow rivers, noise carries differently. It vibrates through sediment, it warns, and it challenges at the same time. The largest bull shark shifted course immediately, turning toward the new hull with controlled speed. The deputy swore under his breath. They followed the surge inland, the wildlife officer said quietly. Rifle already unstrapped from the rack. They won't just scatter. The skiff edged closer, careful not to stall in the strongest part of the current. Jamie and Mark stayed flat against the stable planks, muscles trembling from fatigue. The water around the broken section of dock pulsed again. A dorsal fin cut toward the boat now, not frantic, not blind. Measuring. Bull sharks don't rely on sight alone. They read vibration like language. The officer raised the rifle but hesitated. Shooting into brown water risks ricochet, wasted rounds, escalation. The largest shark surfaced half a body length from the skiff, head breaking the surface for a second, blunt snout and black eye visible before submerging again. The boat rocked sharply as something struck its underside. Not a full breach. A test. The deputy throttled briefly, repositioning to keep distance from the broken dock debris, drifting in tight clusters. "We go in fast," he said, "one at a time." The skiff aligned with the remaining stable section of dock. Mark moved first, timing the jump between swells in the water. He launched across the narrow gap and landed hard against the side of the boat, deputy grabbing his vest and hauling him over in one motion. The second he cleared the edge, the water erupted below, where his legs had been seconds earlier. Teeth snapped shut on air. Jamie didn't hesitate. She followed immediately, arms burning as she lunged forward. For half a heartbeat, she was suspended over opaque brown. Then hands grabbed her wrists and dragged her in. The officer fired a single controlled shot into the water beside the largest fin as it surged toward the hull again. The impact startled the shark, but did not end the threat. It twisted violently, tail slamming into the skiff with bone-shaking force. The deputy gunned the engine hard this time, prop biting into current as the boat lunged forward out of the tight circle. Another shark tracked behind them for several yards before veering off, unwilling to chase into shallower, noisier water near the upstream bend. The river widened slightly there, current breaking around exposed roots and debris piles. Only when the dorsal fins disappeared entirely did the officer lower his rifle. Jamie collapsed against the interior bench, shaking uncontrollably now that movement was no longer required. Mark stared back at the broken dock, shrinking behind them. From distance it looked small and insignificant, just splintered wood against a wide river. The red had already thinned into the current, carried downstream toward marsh and estuary. Official reports would later call it a rare inland shark encounter, following extreme weather displacement. Accurate, incomplete. Hurricanes don't just flood homes and fell trees, they redraw boundaries, they push ocean into river and predator into corridor. The surge would recede within weeks. Salinity levels would drop. Most of the sharks would drift back toward brackish water where hunting felt familiar. But for days, sometimes longer, the river would not be what locals believed it to be. It would carry something borrowed from the sea. Back at the launch ramp, emergency crews counted survivors in silence. 2 kayaks missing. 2 lives gone in water that had seemed calm hours earlier. Jamie looked at the river one last time before stepping into an ambulance. The surface lay flat again, sun reflecting clean and bright. No fins, no churn, just brown current sliding past like it always had. But she understood something now that the storm had made clear. The river isn't isolated, it connects. When wind and surge tear through coastlines, they don't ask permission. They open pathways. And predators follow pathways without hesitation. Days later, fishermen upriver would report heavy wakes moving just beneath the surface at dusk. Wildlife officials would monitor salinity and advise caution until levels normalized. Most residents would shrug it off as temporary anomaly. The river had always been safe, they would say. It would be safe again. But storms remember routes even after skies clear. And somewhere between estuary and inland bend, a bull shark would continue cruising slow and deliberate through water that wasn't always its own. Proof that after the storm passes, what it brings in does not always leave immediately.